G'day, I'm Gavin from HurleysFlyFishing. If fly fishing is something you want to get into, you want to do a course with us. We'll take you up to New G and we'll teach you how to catch trout. $99, get in touch with us and we'll teach you how to be a superstar fly fisher. Now the system we're using here is, we've got the intermediate line, what I've just said just gets underneath the surface. We've got a 9-foot leader. Where we join a bit of tippet, we leave one of the tags off and we tie on another fly, which is, I've got a little damsel fly, which you can imagine would be here, little damsels, mud eyes and things like that. And like a couple of feet behind that, I've got what we call a magoo, or a variant of a magoo. And it's got a bright orange head on that, so it's going to be very noticeable, but it's still going to have that action that you would expect from a damsel. They're just going to see it. And trout, like most things, become very curious as well. So half the battle is getting them to see your fly, and then they're a bit short on hand, so they quite often just need to grab it with their mouth, and then it's too late for them. But we'll do that in move it in like a darting motion. You can imagine like a little minnow or a damsel will swim in maybe 10 centimetre little darting sort of motion there, and that's what we want to try and imitate with the use of these two flies. And I don't really care which one they eat, as long as it's one of those. Out of a boat's a little different as well. As we drift, you can imagine with the wind as it's picked up, we use like a drogue, and this is just a basic sea drogue or a sea anchor that you put out, and that'll fill with water, and it just slows the boat down as it drifts along there, and that just allows you to fish areas in front of yourself a little bit better. There's various types you can get. That you can get rectangle ones that sort of just pull in almost like a parachute. This one is like a sea anchor, so that absorbs a lot of water, expands out, and just slows that drift down. And you can angle that depending on how you want the boat to drift as well. So handy little thing that you can use there to allow you to fish more successfully out of a boat in lakes like magnificent Lake Wendouree. Now, it does pay when you're fishing these lakes to have a decent set of glasses so you can see the weed and the structure and the depth. So what we've got the intermediate line, and I need to let that sink a little bit and then retrieve that around like a foot or so above that weed bank. So I've got weed about 4 feet below the boat now, so you let that line sink and then you just retrieve that along, and just you keep an eye on how your fly's tracking to make sure that it's about a foot or so above that weed bank, so that the fish can see that quite easily as they are on the search for a little bit of tucker. A lot of these lakes in suburbia, they're multi-purpose, and Wendouree is obviously well known for its like as a rowing lake, and they certainly use it. A lot of the local schools here do an awful lot of rowing and things like that as well. So yeah, very handy for them and pretty handy for us fishermen as well. And it's very important too, when you are fishing these flies, you strip them in, you retrieve them the whole way. Particularly with an electric motor, you can catch these fish literally right at the boat. So as you get closer to it, it helps with a big long 10-foot rod as well. Raise that rod and lift those flies till they're just under the surface. Quite often that can create the opportunity for that fish to lunge at it because it thinks it's getting away. So fish your flies completely to the boat, and you just be surprised at how many more fish you'll catch that way. There we go. That's good. Assisted with that little damsel, and got a bit blowy out there, and it almost gets to the point, if I wasn't making a TV show, I'd be tucked up at home. And we thought we'd come up to where we're a little bit more sheltered, and a lovely little area. And I think it comes down to when you're fishing lakes, it can be a bit daunting. Always taking a little bit of line, getting him not hooked around my feet. It can be a bit daunting with some lakes because it all looks the same. You look around everywhere, and whereas a river, you can see the lovely little rock, and you can imagine where a fish would sit behind. But they're essentially looking for two things. One is not to get eaten by a big cormorant or deceived by a cagey fly fisherman, and the other is food. So when you look to a lake like this, you're looking for perhaps depth, so you're going to use your sounder, and that's going to show you up a couple of deeper holes that you can work with, which is terrific. And also for a lot of these reeds, we talk about the food they're going to get, and they're going to eat damsels, little scud, mud eyes and things like that, and that's where they're going to live, in around reedy areas like that. And this is a rainbow. You can tell he's got a lovely red stripe down his side. And this is a rainbow. You can tell he's got a lovely red stripe down his side, and they'll be cruising up and down these areas, these what we call like reed banks and things like that, and they'll have the mud eyes and that as they swim through to climb up and hatch out. And he's seen my damsel impersonation there, and he thought he'd have it rather than let that get away. So that's a nice little rainbow of he'd be £1.5 to £2. We'll get that net and get him in. And that red stripe that runs along there, and generally on their gill plate, and they'll also have a lot of spots on their tail as well. But rainbows are a fantastic fish to catch and target, and they're throughout our river systems as well as our lakes. So yeah, fantastic fish. So it makes it all worthwhile. When it gets pretty difficult and it's cold and windy and you're starting to lose interest, still persist, because you never know, that next cast can bring up a fish like that, and that's a handy fish to catch and makes it all worthwhile. So that's when you go fly fishing. Anyone can catch fish when it's easy, but when you get a couple of fish when it's pretty difficult, it just makes it all worthwhile, and there's a lot more satisfaction that goes with it. Just get him back in. Just hold him in there and just support him until he can virtually swim out of your hands there. And it just takes a little bit, because they've had they're probably a little bit disorientated after getting hooked up there for a second. Come on, mate. Just a little bit of a kick there. It just pays to put a little bit of time to make sure that they're right, and off he goes, and then somebody else can catch him as well. So yeah, as I always say, certainly nothing wrong with banging the odd one on the head and keeping it, but personally I like to put it back and let somebody else have the same enjoyment that I've got out of catching that fish, that they can have it as well. So catch and release is a pretty cool thing to do, I think. So next time you get one, decide whether you want to keep it or give someone else the opportunity to have that same enjoyment.